Harvey, where are you? Right. Okay, I'm going to get started with the sponsors. Year of Learning by Sue and Arnie Gerlich in memory of Malka Perlman and Philip Mann, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust. Rav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yosrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Dia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Fetterbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Fetterbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbus Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell and Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Charna bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levy, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. And we have a month of learning by Haran and Mal Haller in memory of her father, Yosef Eliezer ben Tzvi Hirsch, by B. Pizer in memory of her father, Yisachar Dov ben Shmuel, by Mordechai and Miriam Burr in memory of his mother, Manya bas Harav Shimon Halevi, Stanley Presser in memory of his wife, Chayalea bas Ze'ev HaKohen. A week of learning by Bonnie Gelb Jackson in memory of her father, Mordechai Yoel ben Binyamin, and a day of learning, that will be, that's not till next week. Okay, today, or it was this week, a day of learning by Rabbi Benjamin and Barbara Yasker in memory of his mother, Fredla Rachel bas Mordechai Yosef. Today, the 23rd, by Fagi Kleinbart in memory of her mother, Devorah Kayla bas Aharon. And today also by Leona and Walter Friedrichs in memory of her late husband, Tzvi Rachmiel ben Avraham. On Shabbos, a day of learning by Rosalind Greenberg Haskell in memory of her husband, Eliezer ben Meir. And that is it for today. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Kranker Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shem Matzliah, L'chol B'nai Israel, a good gebenched Yar.
Amen.
Amen. Rabbi, I'm confused about the service times for Wolverton.
Sorry, what,
I'm
Steve?
confused about the service times for Wolverton.
Okay, just a brief note. The only change was 7 o'clock for Mincha, one Mincha at B. Okay,
On Shabbos.
on Shabbos, yeah. Okay. All right. The Gemara today really picks up a little bit still, I would say, on the topic of mezuzah. Okay. Okay, on Yud Bet Amud Aleph, but it's also going to finish up then that topic and move on to a new theme as well. Okay, so we are really about 8 lines down from the top of the Amud on Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Okay. And as I said, we were dealing with the whole question of, could it be that leprosy or tzarat of some form, let's use that term, could apply to a synagogue, okay? And the argument was raised, maybe in the cities, no, and in the villages or the towns, yes. So Gemara, after having discussed that, okay, Rabbi Yehuda came up with a statement, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ani lo shamati elamakom mikudash bilvad. Okay? That basically he heard that only a place like the Beis Hamikdash is not affected by negaim, by tzaraat. Okay? Now, the question is whether that also refers to synagogues and Batei Midrash. That's part of the issue. Okay? So we pick up the Gemara there. B'mai kamiflage, what then are they arguing about? Tanakama Savar, Yerushalayim, Lo Nitchalka L'Shvatim. That the earlier Tanah, okay, felt that Jerusalem belonged, and by Jerusalem it means not only the area of the Beis Hamikdash, but also the entire city. Okay? And maybe that's what the argument is about. Belong to all of the tribes. The Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Yerushalayim Nitchalka L'Shvatim. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, the whole city, okay, was not a single unit, okay, but the area of the Mikdash, okay, the Azara, the Lishkot, etc., okay, that ultimately belonged to all of the tribes after it had been initially designated for Yehuda and Binyamin, but the rest of the city simply belonged to whatever tribe it was located in. Okay? And so the Gemara picks up, continuing, Ubeplugta Dahani Tanai, okay? And that's similar to the argument of the following Tanaim. The Tanya, because it was taught in a Braita, Mahaya Bechelkol Shal Yehuda, Har Habayit, Halishkot, V'ha'azarot. What portion of the, let's call it the Har Habayit, right? The entire temple precinct was in the tribe of Judah. Okay, it was the Har Habayit area. In other words, okay, it would appear the chambers and the Azarot, the courtyards, basically. Okay? So if you have a map, as I'm reaching for now, of the temple area. All right. This is taken, I believe, from Art Scroll. I don't know what page because it didn't tell on this diagram. Okay, but Har Habayit is considered the entire area. Okay, and then the other areas are broken down, okay, into either the large area, which is the Ezras Nashim with certain rooms attached to it, okay? For example, okay? And versus the other, right? Umahaya b'chelko shel Binyamin, asks the Gemara. And what was the section belonged to Binyamin? Ulam v'hechal ubeit kodshei hakdoshim. Okay? Namely, if we think of this part of the diagram, right? We have, right, entrance area, the ulam, kodshei kadoshim, things like that area. Okay? The what I would call mamash, the Mishkan area per se. Okay? Now, if that's the case, the Gemara then tells us, Uritzua haita yotz'a michelko shel Yehuda v'nechneset michelko shel Binyamin. And there was a small strip of land that left Yehuda and basically touched into Binyamin, and that basically was one corner of the large Mizbeach. Okay, one little corner, right? Uba haya Mizbeach banui, and in that area, the outer altar was built. Ubinyamin Hatzadik haya mitzta'er aleh leva'ala b'chol yom. And it says the Gemara, that Binyamin the righteous, okay, would cry. In other words, the families of the tribe of Binyamin would weep that that one little section also did not belong to them. And they wanted to swallow it up. Shneamar, Hofech alav kol hayom. Okay? Citing from the end of Devarim, right? The blessing of the tribe. Right? Lefichach zacha Binyamin hatzadik v'ne'asa ushpazichan legvura. Therefore, says the Gemara, Benjamin, which was a righteous tribe, okay, became the host, okay, for the Almighty, right? As it's written, va'uvein ketefav shachen. Also part of the blessing there, okay, that it would dwell within its shoulders. Bahai Tana, okay, and the other Tana, Savai Yerushalayim lo nitchalka l'shvatim, that Jerusalem was not divided up and shared, let's say, among the tribes. The Tanya, as taught in the Braita, ein maskirin batim b'Yerushalayim lafi she'ena shelahen, that people were not able to rent out, so to speak, their homes in Jerusalem because it didn't belong to them. Okay, they weren't their private property. Okay, so if they're not their own private property, is that, by the way, going to have some implication on the issue of negaim, of tzarat on houses? We're going to see, right? Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok Omer, he says, af lo mitot. They weren't even able to rent out beds. Okay, in other words, the idea when people would come for Ole Regel, where were they going to stay, right? No B&Bs, okay? Lafichach orot kadoshim ba'alei ushpazichinan notlin otan bezroa. And therefore, says the Gemara, under those circumstances, okay, the hides of sacred animals, okay, were to be taken by the hosts by force. In other words, if they lent their house or their apartment or basically beds out for Ole Regel, and the Ole Regel were to have brought certain kudshim, the hides of those animals, which normally would have gone to the Kohanim, instead the hosts would take them as their payment, so to speak, for putting the people up. Now, Amar Abaye says Abaye as follows: Shma mina orech ara lamishvak inish gufa umashcha leushpize. So Abaye is suggesting we learn from this, says, that it was the common practice of people to leave the pitcher or the jug of wine, umashcha, okay, right, and the skin or the hide of the animal, leushpize, to his host. Okay? That was rather than having to take it by force, they left it as a tip, who knows, okay. Now, we come back now to our question of what we saw earlier. The Gemara had told us in the top of the Amud that maybe there's a difference between cities and villages in terms of tzara'at. Okay? And so the Gemara now asks, Udikfarim mi matame benegaim, and is it possible that synagogues and batei midrash in the large cities would be exempt, but those in villages would be susceptible, I'm going to say, to some form of tzara'at? Vahatanya. But isn't it taught in a Braita, la'achuza, that it's for their portion, their possession? Okay? Ad sheyichbashu ota, which means that it wasn't really their possession until they conquered the land. Kavshu ota velo chilkuha lishvatim. Okay? They could have conquered the land under Yehoshua, but not divided it up among all of the tribes. Chalku l'shvatim v'lo chalku l'beit avot. Maybe they divided it up according to the tribes, but they didn't divide it up according to the houses, the families, right? Chalku l'beit avot ve'ein kol echad makir et shalom. Well, they could have divided it up to families, but no one knew what section or portion was particularly his. Minayin, how do we know this? Talmud Lomar, because the text tells us elsewhere, Uva asher lo habayit, implying mi shemiyuchad lo. Okay? In other words, if the pasuk says, and he comes to that which is his residence, how does he know which one is his? It's the one that's particular to him. Therefore, says the Darshan, the pasuk, Yatsa elu she'en miyuchadim lo. That therefore it should exclude those portions or locations, okay, that are not uniquely his. Ela mechavarta kedeshanin me'ikara. But rather we must say that it is clear as to how we taught it earlier. Okay, in that point. Okay. Now we finish that discussion and we come back now to a new topic. Umatkinan lo kohen echad acher. We said that when the Kohen Gadol was sequestered during those 7 days, they also prepared another Kohen. And so Gemara wants to clarify, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Ira bo psul, kodem tamid shel shachar. If something happened to the Kohen Gadol and it resulted in the fact that he would have a pasul and validity, okay, before offering the morning Tamid offering, what happened? Mechanchin oto b'tamid shel shachar. They initiate, I'm going to use that word for mechanchin, okay, the new or the fill-in Kohen Gadol by having him carry out the offering of the Tamid of the morning. Okay, now let's go on. Ela irabo pasul achar Tamid shel shachar b'ma mechanchin oto. Okay, however, I'm translating the Ella here. If there occurred to him some situation of making him invalid after the morning Tamid offering, how then would they initiate him? Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava, he suggests, ba'avneit, by what kind of belt he has on. Now, we know that the Kohen, average Kohen, had 4 garments. We know that the Kohen Gadol had 8 garments. Each of them wore some kind of avneit, some kind of a
Belt.
belt, girdle, waistband. Okay,
Ah.
we could try translate it a number of ways, but the issue is going to be what material was that waistband made from? Was that waistband the same, regardless of whether you were the Kohen Gadol or whether you were a average Kohen? Or was there something different in the one worn by the Kohen Gadol from that worn by the average Kohen?
Shotness.
Well, we're going to see that could be the case. Okay? Right? So the Gemara tells us, Hanech leman amar avnato shel Kohen Gadol, zehu avnato shel Kohen Hedyot. That's acceptable for the one who says that the avnate of the Kohen Gadol was the same as the avnate of an ordinary Kohen. Ela, however, rather, Laman da Amar avnato shel Kohen Gadol lo zahu, or lo zahu avnato shel Kohen Hadyot. But according to the one who said that the Kohen Gadol's waistband avnet was not the same as an ordinary Kohen, my ikalamema. What are you going to say then? Amar Abaye. Abaye suggests as follows: Lovesh Shmona, namely that fill-in Kohen, right? Umehapech Betzinora Ukidarav Huna, namely that what he would do is he would dress him in the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol, as opposed to the 4 garments of the ordinary Kohen. And then they would give him let's say, a 2-pronged fork or a hooked utensil, and he would turn over some part of the wood or the meat or something as part of the tamid offering or as another offering. And as a result, having put on the garment and having done some form of an avoda, that would then initiate him into the role clearly as Kohen Gadol designate. Okay. Why? As said by Rav Huna, the Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, Zar shehafach betzinura chayav mita, that a stranger, a non-Kohen, who utilized the utensil for turning over wood or turning over korban, okay, would merit a death penalty. Rav Papa Amar, but Rav Papa says as we go over to the next Amud, Avodato mechanachto. According to Rav Papa, it was not necessary to have both the clothes and an act of avoda. Simply the act of worship would be sufficient to initiate him. Okay? So the Gemara says in regards to that question, all right? Milo Tanya, was it not taught as follows in a Braita? Kol hakelim she'asa Moshe Mashichatan Mikadashtan, all the utensils that were fashioned by Moshe, their anointing made them holy. Mikan ve'elech avodatan mechanachatan. But after that, it was their use as part of the avoda, as part of the worship. That's what initiated them into being considered holy. Hachanami avodato mechanachato. Here too, we might say that his participation in the worship and the avoda made him initiated. Now, we have a statement, Ki ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, right? Remember, he used to commute, again, one of the scholars back and forth, and said, Avnato shel Kohen Hedyat, that it was like his Avnato was like that of an ordinary Kohen. Rebbe v'Rebbe Eliezer v'Rebbe Shimon, that this was a machloket among them. Chad Amar shel Klayim. One said that it was the avnate was made of Klayim. In other words, a combination of materials, right? V'chad Amar shel Botz, and the other said it was made from fine linen. So the Gemara says, since we don't know who said what, for sure, Tistayim, the Rebbe hu Amar shel Kalayim. You might want to conclude that it was Rebbe who claimed that the Kohen Gadol's avnate was made of Kalayim, of a combination. The Tanya, because it's taught elsewhere in a Braita, right? Ein bein Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Hedyat, Ela Avnet, Divrei Rebbe, that there was no difference between the Avnet of the Kohen Gadol and that of an ordinary Kohen, except for his Avnet, according to the words of Rebbe. Rebbe Elazar b'Rebbe Shimon Omer, he said, Af lo Avnet, not even the Avnet. So the question that comes up here is, when are they talking about this? Okay? After all, we do know that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol took off his entire 8-garment outfit and instead reverted back to the same garments as a ordinary Kohen, the 4 garments, okay? He switched back and forth, okay? So therefore, maybe that's what they're talking about. Was it during the rest of the year, or was it only regarding Yom Kippur? Emat, I might say, Einema b'shar yemot hashana, if I'm going to talk about the rest of the days of the year. Tu va'ika, okay? Kohen Gadol, there's more there. Kohen Gadol mishamesh b'shmona v'hedyat ba'arba'ah. Because normally the rest of the year, Kohen Gadol used 8 garments and the ordinary Kohen 4. Ela lav b'yom haKippurim. Was it not then that we're talking about the example of Yom HaKippur, where the Kohen Gadol would switch garments? Amre lo, I might say no, because le'olam b'sha'ar yemot hashana, we're talking about the rest of the days of the year. Ubehinach t'shavim, and in these they were equal. Ki ata Rabin amar. However, the Gemara now adds to us that when Ravin, another commuter, okay, who would bring back the lessons, Avnato shel Kohen Gadol biyom HaKippurim. What they were talking about was the avnate worn by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Divrei Hakol shel Botz. Everyone agreed that that day he wore one made of fine linen. B'shar yemot hashana, divrei hakol shel Klayim. The rest of the year, okay, that's when he wore the one of mixed ingredients. Lo nechlaku ela ba'avnato shel Kohen Hedyat. Maybe they weren't disagreeing, okay, maybe their disagreement was only focused on the ordinary Kohen avnate. Bein b'shar yemot hashana, bein b'yom haKippurim. Whether it was the rest of the year or on Yom Kippur. Sherebbe omer shel Kalayim. That Rebbe said it was made from Kalayim. The Rabbi Eliezer b'Rebbe Shimon Omer shel botz. And Rabbi Eliezer b'Rebbe Shimon said, no, that was fine linen. In other words, it was the all year round avnet. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, what did he say? Af anan nami tanina. So we also taught as follows. In the pasuk where it says, al bisaro, ma talmud loma, what does it teach then? When it says he wore it on his body, on his flesh, yilbash lahavi mitznefet va'avnait laharamat hadeshen, divrei Rebbe Yehuda. That when it says that he wore, okay, garments, it's giving an example that he put on his mitznefet, what we might call his mitre, va'avnate, and his special avnate, for the purpose of removing the ashes. That's the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Dosa Omer says, Lahavi bigdei kohen gadol biyom hakippurim. No, he argues with Rabbi Yehuda, no, that for that purpose, okay, they would bring the, I'm going to call it for the moment, the used 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol for a normal, regular, ordinary Kohen in order to remove the ashes. Shehein ksharim l'kahen hedyat, because they are valid, they're suitable for an ordinary Kohen. Now, Rebbe is going to challenge that view. Excuse me one second. Okay. Okay. Rebbe says as follows. Shtei tshuvot b'davar. I really have, says Rebbe, 2 answers to this by which to disagree. Chada, one is the avnato shel kohen gadol biyom hakippurim lo zehu avnato shel kohen hedyat. That I argued that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen of the Kohen Gadol was different from the avnet of an ordinary Kohen. Va'od, and furthermore, I would argue, says Rebbe, begadim shenishtam shata, these garments that were used, that were worn, bahen kedusha chamura, they possess a strict or higher level of sanctity. Tishamesh behen kedusha kala, you say that they would be used then for a purpose of a lower level sanctity. Ela ma Talmud loma. Therefore, what do we see the text telling us? Yilbash, when it says he wears them, the rabot et ha-shakin. Okay, that means to include the worn garments. Va'azda Rabbi Dosa l'tame. And Rabbi Dosa went according to his own perspective, to Tanya as it was taught in a pasuk, v'hinicham sham, that he put them there, namely, milamed shetu'unin gniza, that according to Rabbi Dosa, it meant that those worn garments worn by the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur were then put away, put in geniza. In other words, no longer used. Okay. Rabbi Dosa Omer, he says, Shelo yishtamesh bahen Yom HaKippurim acher. In order, he argued, that no one would use them again for another Yom Kippur. Now, that would seem to imply, that according to Rabbi Dosa, every single Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol got a new set of garments. Okay? And that's what he would wear then throughout the year. Right? Tanu Rabbanim. We come back now to an earlier discussion, right? We asked what happens if the Kohen Gadol was rendered invalid. Okay? And what about the fill-in? So the Breita now tells us. Tanu Rabbanan, says this Breita. Irabo pasul iminu acher tachta. Let's assume for a moment that something happened to the Kohen Gadol. He was found tameh, for example, right? And they appointed somebody else in his place. Okay? However, it's possible, remember, that maybe during those 7 days of sequestering, that he immersed in a mikveh. And we resolved the cause of the invalidity. Okay? So what do we do then? Right? We have now, in theory, 2 Kohen Gadols. Right? So what happens, says the Gemara? Rishon, the first, or what we'll call the original Kohen Gadol, Choser la'avodato. He returns back to his worship, his job. Sheni, the second one, Kol mitzvot kehuna gedola alam, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir argues that because he was upgraded, let's use that term, okay? Therefore, all of the appropriate mitzvot associated with the status of Kohen Gadol must be maintained by that individual. Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Rishon choser la'avodato. The original does return to his worship. Sheni, the upgraded one, Eino ra'ui lo lekohen gadol v'lo lekohen hedyat. He is now in a state of limbo because he's no longer considered valid as Kohen Gadol, but he's no longer still in the status, let's say, of an ordinary Kohen. Right? And what happens? The Gemara now clarifies for us, okay, what was Rabbi Yossi's reasoning behind making this point. Amar Rabbi Yossi, he says, Ma'aseh Yosef ben Elam. There once was an incident with Yosef ben Elam, Betzipori, who happened to be a apparently known Kohen in the city of Sepphoris. She'irabo pasul beKohen Gadol, uminuhu tachtav. And what happened? There was a situation that the original official, whatever term we want to use, Kohen Gadol, had some sort of a pisul, and this Yosef ben Elam from Sepphoris was appointed in his stead, right? Uminu tachtav. But then the pisul of the original was resolved. Va'amru Chachamim, argues Rabbi Yossi, the sages at that time said, Rishon choser la'avodato, that the original returns to his work, to his service. Sheni, the second one, Eino ra'ui lo lekohen gadol v'lo lekohen hedyat. Second one is not worthy of being considered Kohen Gadol or a common Kohen, an ordinary Kohen. Okay? And what's the reason? Kohen Gadol mishum eva. Okay? Why? Because we're concerned about the rivalry or the jealousy that might be between the two individuals. Kohen Hedyat, Mishum Ma'alin B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin. So Rabbi Yossi's argument is he can't be considered a Kohen Gadol because that would create rivalry and jealousy between the two of them. He can't be put back to a Kohen, ordinary Kohen, because we have a concept that says, right, once you've raised,
elevated him, you can't bring him down.
right, once you elevated him, you can't lower it. So we're going to just continue a little bit over. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana. He says as follows, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. In the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the following. Halacha ka Rabbi Yossi. The law in Yud Gimel Amud Aleph top line says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is like Rabbi Yossi. Umode Rabbi Yossi she'im avar va'avad avodato kshera. But Rabbi Yossi also acknowledges that if the replacement Kohen Gadol did carry out any avoda, his avoda is acceptable. It's valid. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, halacha ka Rabbi Yossi, that the law, yes, is like Rabbi Yossi. Okay. Umodeh Rabbi Yossi. But Rabbi Yossi also acknowledges she'imei Rishon, that if the original Kohen Gadol would then have died, shechozer la'avodato, that the replacement then is the one who comes and fills in, right? So it's only rivalry during one's lifetime. Okay? That's the concern. And therefore, if the original were to pass away, okay, that would be acceptable for that one then to continue. Okay, and now we'll finish up. Pshita mahu detema. That's obvious. Okay, why? What is the reason that you're telling us? Havya le tsara mechayim kamashmalan. Okay, we're concerned here. Okay, that it would involve rivalry during the lifetime. Okay, but says the Gemara, all right, kamash malan. We're not really. This is not necessarily the case. Okay, and therefore, we still assume that the final decision is like Rabbi Yossi, and that's where we'll stop. Okay, for today. All right, everybody.
Good.
So have